Some head coaching openings are beginning to be filled, while others are actually opening up late. We get more perspective on that now from Gary Myers, our NFL insider here on This Week in Football. So, Gary, one position we know is filled, Lovie Smith to Tampa. Do you like the fit?
I like it a lot. The fact that Lovie previously coached in Tampa working for Tony Dungy, he's familiar with ownership, he's familiar with the town. And listen, he had a good run in Chicago. He got the Bears to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as his quarterback, which is a pretty good accomplishment for a head coach. And I think he'll do a good job there, and I really do like that hire.
Yeah, he also had 10 wins his last season there, and Mark Trestman, who everybody lauded this year, only came up with 8 wins for Chicago this season. Now, he also gets final say on the roster. And look, Tampa Bay doesn't have a general manager yet, so ownership makes this hire. What do you think about that dynamic? The fact that there's not a GM in place with the head coach already there, and that Lovie is going to have final say on the roster?
Well, in a lot of cases, you'd say, it's backwards. They should have hired the general manager first.
Right.
But, in some structures in the NFL, the coach does have a lot of power, and maybe they'll just bring in more of a personnel guy now to assist Lovie, making those decisions. But, having the final say in the 53-man roster is a pretty important responsibility for the coach. And the fact that Lovie has responsibility, has the experience, rather, as a head coach for a number of years in the NFL, he's certainly capable of doing that.
Now, some people had said Detroit was interested in Lovie Smith, and Lovie jumped on Tampa quickly. So Detroit, which we all sort of agreed was the most attractive job, was one that he put behind Tampa, or at least so it seemed. Ken Whisenhunt is now the favorite by, the consensus for the Detroit job. Is that what you're hearing, and do you think he's a good fit?
Yeah, I think he's a great fit there. When you look at his history, Ryan, he helped resurrect the career of Kurt Warner in Arizona. And the only reason he failed in Arizona after Warner retired is they just could never find a quarterback who can, put up big numbers and help them win. So he goes on to San Diego and helps straighten out Phillip Rivers after Rivers had a couple of poor seasons. And now, San Diego wins a wild card game and they go to Denver in the divisional round. Whisenhunt is one of those guys, he's in the category of a recycled coach, okay? But he's one of those guys that really does deserve a second chance. And getting to work with somebody like Matthew Stafford, who has a ton of ability but some mechanical flaws, I think Whisenhunt would be a perfect choice in Detroit.
So do you think that's more of a priority for the Lions rather than maybe getting some discipline or structure that they didn't have with Jim Schwartz? And maybe Whisenhunt brings that. But even more so, it's about maximizing Matthew Stafford?
Oh, for sure. And I think that Whisenhunt will bring the discipline because there was never any major problems in Arizona. But when you consider you have Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson, and they had a lead in the NFC North with Jake Cutler hurt in Chicago and Aaron Rodgers out for a month and a half in Green Bay, and they still couldn't win that division, it was time for a change there.
Now, the situation in Miami is interesting because all of us were sort of wondering, Joe Philbin or Jeff Ireland, the head coach or GM, are they going to go? And instead, it's Mike Sherman, the offensive coordinator, who takes the fall.
Right. When you look at Miami's situation, that all they had to do was beat Buffalo or the Jets in their final 2 games to make the playoffs, and they get shut out by Buffalo and scored 7 points against the Jets, you knew there was a change coming. And all the stuff with the bullying situation, you wondered, where Stephen Roth was going to make the change. And, for now, Joe Philbin keeps his job. And the fact that they fired the offensive coordinator, who was very good friends with Sherman. Sherman actually hired Philbin in Green Bay, and they've known each other forever. That's a pretty good indication that Philbin is going to stay. They wouldn't have fired Sherman if Philbin was leaving also. Jeff Ireland's situation is still unresolved. He's had a lot of questionable personnel decisions over the years, but for now, they've pinpointed the offense. And the other thing about Sherman is he coached Ryan Tannehill at Texas A&M, so that breaks up a long-time relationship.
Yeah, and the other thing is you keep a head coach, but you take away a good friend and his offensive coordinator. Mike Munchak, according to reports, didn't stand for that in Tennessee, ended up bolting and turning down a big money extension because he wanted to keep his coaching staff intact. Do you think does the head coach lose any respect with the players when he lets somebody else fall on the sword for him from his staff who's a good friend?
Well, I think the players understand as much as anybody this is a game of self-preservation, and at some point you have to make a decision about your own career and your own family versus, the career and families of good friends. There's only 32 of these jobs, and if you're willing to give yours up because you don't want to fire assistant coaches. I mean, that's a man of strong principles. So.
Well, but really strong principles, and I would imagine that other coaches would then want to be a part of a Mike Munchak staff, whereas if you're Joe Philbin and you just had Mike Sherman take the fall for you, if you're another coach, do you want to go be on his staff now, or are you looking at him as somebody who might submarine you and put the blame on you at some point?
But this stuff happens all the time. It's not just Joe Philbin. Coaching staff changes, our annual occurrence. What Munchak did, standing on principle like that and walking away, that I would consider to be unusual. And the other thing you have to think about is, who was hiring Mike Munchak to be the head coach in the NFL? Now, maybe he winds up with the Penn State job, which is where he went to school, and maybe that was his dream job, and maybe he knew he had an inside track to that. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. But I wouldn't say that Mike Munchak distinguished himself as an NFL head coach, that he can just walk away from it and figure, okay, I'm just going to walk into another situation.
Well, Tom Coughlin was sort of saved from this situation in some senses with Kevin Gilbride, the offensive coordinator for the Giants, retiring.
Right.
And, it does feel very Giant-like that they would find a classy way to handle that situation where, all parties sort of save face and they can move on. But the question is, who becomes that offensive coordinator now for the Giants?
Well, I've been mentioning all season that if a change like this took place and that the Greg Schiano and his staff got fired in Tampa, then Mike Sullivan, the Bucs offensive coordinator, made the most sense. He was on Coughlin's staff with the Giants from 2004 to 2011, the last 2 years as Eli's quarterback coach. 2 years ago, in his final year in 2011, Eli throws for almost 5,000 yards, and the Giants win the Super Bowl. Sullivan runs a system that is similar to Gilbride's. So what you're doing is you're bringing in a fresh voice, somebody that Eli has responded to in the past, and you have to figure that Sullivan will put in his own wrinkles to the offense, but you're not changing anything totally for a quarterback who's only played in one system for the first 10 years of his career. So I think this move does make a lot of sense. But I also will say, I thought if Gilbride was looked upon as the scapegoat, it is unfair when you consider the state of the Giants' offensive line last year and the fact they basically had no running game all season.
Well, nonetheless, that's one of the real interesting questions in the offseason for Big Blue. Who is that next coordinator who gets to work with Eli?